Welcome to the first live stream of 2025. Is it too late to say Happy New Year, folks?
Go on then.
No.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
This is actually 2 months since our last live stream, so there's quite a bit that we want to cover. And we thought we would start with Charles's visit to Alloa, to the food bank, because we're still furious.
Definitely.
As a bit of a refresher, here's just a little bit of footage of Charles visiting a food bank.
It's a royal flight with the King at enormous expense, landing in Alloa to come to the food bank.
Big helicopter to come and see a food bank. They can't even bring a tin of.
There's all the people lined up to meet. They've been told to bow down to His Imperial Majesty. Let the meat take!
President, a food bank! A food bank! Is there no shame?
Not my king! Not my king! Not my king! Not my king!
Well done, those folk in Alloa.
Well, good for them.
There was a huge lorry that had been driven across the road to try and screen Charles, but he would certainly have heard the chants.
It's just incredible. I mean, I sort of think, well, do they not understand the way that optic works? So you scoosh it, you're down in Dumfries House. I think that's where he'd been beforehand, down in Ayrshire. Puts his kilt on, gets in his helicopter, comes out to go to a food bank, and you're kind of left thinking, did you take out a few cans of anything or a few jars of some posh stuff from Highgrove with you? Probably not.
The money from the taxes you don't pay.
Yeah. Well, do you remember Luke Graham, who used to be the MP for Alloa a few MPs back? He had a photo taken at the food bank. And I remember saying to him, we was at a hustings, and I said, why do you think that's a good idea? And he goes, I thought I was helping. So you're helping mitigate policies that your party has brought in. That's why they need them. It's just shocking.
They did welcome him, didn't they? They made him some cakes, I think.
Brilliant photo. It was in the National. What a fantastic angle. Charles in the food bank. There's all volunteers behind him. And this cake has been made, presumably, with donated ingredients. Let them eat cake, and then the fluttering of the Union Jack in the corner.
Union Jack, yeah. I mean, he did dress up. He put on his new tartan. It's called the King Charles III tartan, but it got released on Burns Day because, because Scotland, because I'm a king and I've got a kilt, really.
He comes here and he dresses up. When he goes to Wales, does he have a leek? And when he goes to Yorkshire, does he have a whippet and a flat cap? Charles's personal fortune is 1.8 billion. And if you take what it costs to run all the Tussle Trust food banks in Scotland for a year, it's about 15 million, which is less than 1% of his personal fortune. He is standing there getting a photo opportunity.
And a cake.
1% would feed his citizens that are impoverished. I mean, I just think it's shocking. And the thing is, they just don't get it.
And it is, I think it's kind of lose-lose for him because, if it goes there the way he did, helicopter kilt, swans in, swans out, we're going, what's the point? Don't you understand the optics of that are wrong? If he actually gave 15 million to the Tussle Trust people, actually he would get criticised for doing that as well. So I kind of think he just can't win. One way or another, really, he's not going to win.
It all seems like he was in Scotland anyway, so I might as well make a visit. Got to show people that I'm here and I care for Scotland. Now, he also visited Sochi and Sochi Resource Centre, and this is a community-run resource centre that does lots for the community. And yeah, they deserve all the plaudits they get. Why not just go there and go to other places, not go to a food bank? Because that's kind of rubbing salt in the wound going to a food bank.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it, isn't it? It's kind of rubbing salt in the wind. It's not as if we have any criticism or anything to say against the guys that run that food bank. I bet, they work their socks off actually doing it. And I bet they do a really good job. It's just the optics of it are awful.
Yeah.
They really are.
I'm liking Margaret in comments has got a wee suggestion as to where a daffodil could go if he visits Wales.
We agree with you. So that was Charles that we started off with. Now we're going to move on to some snippets from Westminster and some of the WASPy stuff. But first, you'll remember maybe that we interviewed Colin Fox from the SSP back last summer, it was, before the election. And Colin had a prediction as to how things were going to go. And at the time, we were quite doom and gloom because the polls were awful for, the independence parties. But this is what Colin said back before the election.
The next year might be difficult for the independence movement. The general election, as I say, that the polls would lead you to believe the SNP may lose half their seats in Scotland. But that Labour government is in a crisis. And as you said, so many of the problems that we then say are real to us, whether it's about Trident on the Clyde or land reform or reform of the council tax or this, standard of living, etc., Labour will do nothing for working people on that. And so what's your choice? That we have to, expect the Tories to get back in? No, in Scotland, we've got the national question. That's the route for us. Yeah. So what I'm saying is, there's Lenin there, is he on that shoulder? And Lenin wrote a pamphlet called 2 Steps Backward, 1 Step Forward. And that's what I look at. 2 steps backward to a Labour government. It's a waste of time to get rid of the Tories, but their opponents of independence died in the wool, unionists. But they're in crisis, and working people in Scotland facing the crisis won't be saying, well, what we're going to do, wait till somebody else gets elected at Westminster? That's a non-event. Keir Starmer has essentially gutted the Labour Party of left-wingers. But I think the route to independence might be more difficult in the beginning and more profitable and more likely to get an echo later on, 2025, 2026, when there's Scottish Parliament elections. And then we say we're taking that democratic majority case to a Labour government. And dare ye to say that the democratic will of the Scottish people cannot be achieved if we want independence. Yeah. So it's a happy ending, at least.
A happy ending.
That was interesting, wasn't it? When Colin said that at the time, I just thought, that's not very likely. I mean, they've had 14 years to get ready. They're going to come in. Well, they said themselves, hit the ground running, but they've been hitting the ground stumbling, actually.
They totally have. And I thought it would take, 2026, something like that, to really start to disappoint. But no, they were right off the bat.
Yeah, so disappointing from the get-go.
Yeah, absolutely. This next clip we've got is Dave Doogan, who I really think he's very, very good at Westminster. He's quite clear at getting his message across. This is him taking on Starmer. And wait till you see how Starmer responds.
Mr Speaker, before the election, this Prime Minister said he would lower energy bills by £300. Since he took office, they've gone up by £149. He said he would protect the winter fuel payment, but now he's in power, he's stripped it off our pensioners. And he said he lined up for many photos with WASPy women, saying he'd have their backs, and he's just betrayed them in the most scandalous way possible. This is now the defining characteristic of this one-trick phony Prime Minister who says one thing and does another. In Scotland, the SNP are 16 points ahead in the polls. Does he understand? Does he understand why the people of these islands, especially those of us in Scotland, treat him with such contempt?
They used to ask those questions. They used to ask those questions from this sort of area with very many MPs not so long ago. That all changed in July, and he's now carping from right up there. We can hardly hear him.
So utter disrespectful, just abhorrent. And if more people need to see that so they can see just what they think of us. You didn't even make an attempt to. So I know Dave Doogan didn't really ask a question other than, do you realise what contempt there is for you in Scotland? Didn't answer that. He just comes back with a schoolboyish, there used to be more of you and you used to be here. Just you're supposed to be running the country for the benefit of the citizens. And no.
It was pathetic, wasn't it? It really was. It was. So there we go. Nothing like getting us riled up to start with. Now, this next one's interesting. We're starting to move into the area of WASPy, and this is Brian Leishman, who is your MP, am I right, Lynn? I was at the hustings that Brian got elected on. He said Absolutely, he would support the WASPy women. Justice for WASPy can only happen with the Labour government, he said. Absolutely, he said, cost of living can only be tackled with the Labour government. Fuel poverty can only be eradicated with the Labour government. Oh, by the way, we're going to save Grangemouth. Now, none of those things has he been able to have any influence on, but at least he's got the good grace to look embarrassed about it.
In the framing of my question to the Secretary of State, firstly, I'd like to say I'm appalled at this announcement, and I have campaigned with WASPy women, as have many parliamentary colleagues, and this is an incredible letdown. WASPy women, in my opinion, certainly do not need words of disappointment, and they certainly do not need hollow statements. What they need is justice. Does the Secretary of State not agree with that?
I believe that this is a difficult decision, but the right and fair one. We accept that there has been maladministration, that those letters, once we've decided, the department had decided should have been sent out, should have been set out earlier. But for the reasons I have explained, we do not accept the Ombudsman's approach to injustice or to remedy and compensation. We do have to take difficult decisions in government, but this is about what I think is right and fair.
Right and fair.
Right and fair. And the Ombudsman clearly has no teeth because they do not accept the Ombudsman's approach to injustice or remedy or compensation. Is that statement an admission that there was injustice? So we don't accept the approach to injustice. So there was an injustice.
They've accepted it, but they just, they're not doing anything about it. And this phrase, difficult decisions. I can't quite get the Rachel Reeves accent right, Marlene. You do difficult decisions. It's like this waving a magic wand, and it means you can do anything you like as long as you call it a difficult decision. Well,
did they not have a vote today, though?
They did. In fact, Marlene, you had a look at who'd voted.
Yes, they did have a vote today. So there was a 10-minute rule bill that Flynn put forward for the SNP. So basically, the bill was putting a proposal to recompense the WASPy women. That's what it boiled down to. And it was voted on, and no one voted against it. 105 MPs voted for it. And as far as I can make out, every MP from Northern Ireland, so that's DUP, Unionists, what have you, they all voted for it. Plaid Cymru, 3 MPs voted for it. Green Party, 3 MPs, all voted for it. Reform, 3 MPs, all voted for it. Scottish Nationalist Party voted for it. Lib Dems, 61 of them voted for it. There were 9 independents, so that's folk like Jeremy Corbyn and I think a few other former Labour MPs. It might be other kinds of independents. 2 Conservatives voted for it, and 10 Labour MPs, of which 1 was Scottish, and that was Brian Leishman. So well done, Brian. I mean, probably wouldn't agree with most of the policies that you'd want to put into force, but well done for doing that. It's a sort of Pyrrhic victory, isn't it? It's like, so 105 voted for it. That means it's something like 590 didn't bother turning up. And a 10-minute rule bill gets nowhere unless the government agrees to give it business time in the Commons, and they're not going to do that.
It's almost worse, the fact that they're from Scotland.
Yeah.
And my lily-livered MP Graham Downey has so far voted to strip the pensioners of their winter fuel allowance. He abstained on something. It was the debate about workers' changes to employment rights, which he couldn't even be bothered turning up for. And he's abstained on this one too. What's the point? What is the point of him? Apart from that, I'm sure he's a very nice person. Right, now just following on, Kirsty Blackman also had a really good go at, I'm not sure even what that woman's called, the pension secretary, whoever she is, the one who goes, difficult decisions.
No, that's Rachel Reeves that does decisions. That's her accent. Yeah.
It's a stock phrase. It's like, when you're sitting in meetings and you've got the wee bullshit bingo card in front of you, all the kind of thing, you can tick off difficult decisions. I've got a stamp for that one. When was that one said?
Well, this is Kirsty anyway, and she does quite well here.
Anna Sarwar said, under my leadership, WASPy women will finally receive the justice they deserve. Is the justice they deserve being paid less than their male counterparts throughout their career? Is the justice they deserve being sacked or forced to resign from their jobs when they had children? Is the justice they deserve the removal of the winter fuel payment? Why are the Labour government absolutely determined to take every opportunity to screw over 1950s born women?
I am proud the last Labour government's record on helping the lowest paid women pensioners and the improvements that we delivered. This is not about that issue. This is about the way the state pension age was communicated. And if the Honourable Lady wants a different approach, then the the SNP government in Scotland can do a different approach. Using the £4.9 billion settlement we have provided, the biggest ever in the history of devalation, if they want to take a different...
Devalation, what's that then? I think that's where the value of everything we've got goes down. I think
we should do a podcast called The History of Devalation.
Devalation, yeah.
Featuring Liz Kendall.
Thank you, Evelyn. Yes, Liz Kendall. That's
I mean, that's the one thing they can't do. Pensions there's nothing about that they can do about pensions. Nothing about it is devolved. I mean, you think, well, does she really not know that? So maybe the answer is, yeah, she really doesn't know that. Or it's a bit like, Lynn, you were saying you've got stock phrases. So the stock phrase that often comes from the Labour Party now is, get Scotgov to do something about it. Whether or not Scotgov have got the powers or not.
Yeah. And sometimes it appears that they're saying, well, you want to do that, you get on with it, but they're not giving the budget to go along with it. And she said there was 4.9 billion given, but I'm reading today that our block grant is 6 billion less than it was in 2020. Now, when you consider inflation and everything else, our block grant should have gone up, not decreased. So it's all it's like lies, damned lies, statistics, and
difficult decisions.
Difficult decisions. And I mean, partly that's because the British economy itself is in not a good state. So, I mean, in a way, everything's got less money. It's not just Scotland, although we might kind of suspect that sometimes. The other thing is how they've made decisions about where money gets spent. And they've changed what used to be central government spending, which would be reflected in the block grant. It goes to local authorities, and then it doesn't get reflected in the block grant quite to the extent that it should. So just seems to be kind of working against us. And
in doing that, central government going straight to local authorities, they're cutting out the Scottish government. They're it's trying to shut down the devolved government, saying, well, we don't need you, we can just give the money direct to the local authorities and they can deal with it. And again, I always go back to the fact that there is no shortage of money. Money is not actually a real thing. They create it. We're a sovereign currency. We're not backed by gold anymore. They can produce what they want. They're just choosing not to. The room of shareholders and big companies, rather than looking out for the population of the islands, all 4 nations within the islands.
And that brings us up nicely, actually, to the next clip, which is how much is the Scottish government paying to mitigate the choices that Westminster is making?
Next year in our draft budget, mitigating the impacts of UK government policies will rise to over £210 million per year, an increase of over £56 million. This includes spending over £99 million on discretionary housing payments to mitigate the bedroom tax and the benefit cap, maintaining our £41 million commitment to the Scottish Welfare Fund, which provides crisis support and helps eligible people to establish independent living, and around £70 million above the block grant adjustments to mitigate the winter fuel payment cut, ensuring all pensioners' households will receive a minimum £100 of support next winter. And, Presiding Officer, I noted with some disbelief that only yesterday the Secretary of State for the Department of Work and Pensions seemed to suggest that despite this Parliament and this Government not having the powers, that somehow it's up to the Scottish Government to also alleviate the critical situation of the WASPy women. And once again, that is a deep disappointment and an abdication of the responsibility of the UK Government on this and indeed the other areas that we mitigate against.
It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money tied up in mitigating that. Actually, that's money we could be doing something else with. That's money we could be investing in our infrastructure or things. But
yeah, we can't run deficits. And I always think that it's important to emphasize how much is mitigated. You know, what would it be like if this mitigation wasn't in place? And people don't realize that. Again, in some ways you think, actually, you've had it too good here. You're not seeing what the rest of the country's having to deal with, or the rest of these islands, rather, not the country, because it's not one country, it's 4 separate nations, and they don't see what's happening elsewhere. And we still get battered all the time for, you're terrible, when actually people are really lucky to live here and what they get.
Yeah, and I mean, not only just mitigating things, to try and, soften what's coming up from the south, but also all the other raft of things like not having to pay university fees, baby boxes. There's such a lot there. And again, I think you're right, actually, Lynn. I think when it's gone on for such a long time, it's easier if you're older, maybe, to realise that those things are, relatively speaking, new. But, if you've grown up in Scotland over the lifetime of Scottish Parliament or a bit older than that, it's not so easy to kind of keep remembering that and take it on board.
Or if you know people who live in England, because I've got a friend in Hartlepool where my mother lives, and she's got a chronic arthritis condition that she takes an awful lot of medication for, and it costs her an absolute fortune just in filling prescriptions. Yeah. And then when you add on the number of people who are getting routinely evicted because of the cap on the rent, so every month their rent is short, so they just build up arrears and arrears and arrears, and eventually they're just tossed out. I mean, it's a huge difference, but you're right. I don't think people here realise how bad it is in England. I don't know how families in England can keep their heads above water at all without the support that they get.
Yeah. Well, and if you look at, as you say, university fees, 9,000 a year. So, and most of their courses, they're 3 years as opposed to 4 years for an honours that we do up here. But still, 2 years, that's 27,000, and you've got accommodation and food and heating to pay on top of that as well. So when young people leave university with a degree, they leave with a great big whacking debt as well to pay off before they do anything else.
Yeah. Oh, I think I probably say this every month on this live stream about, Scotgov not being good enough at blowing its own trumpet. And actually, I noticed a really good example of it just the other day. So Scotgov, in part of their budget, they've put forward increased spending into Scottish NHS. There was a very detailed layout of what that's going to be used for. So it's partly waiting times, but it's partly more staff, more facilities. First Minister set it all out. And I saw an account of that, and I read it, and I thought, yeah. And I know how that's going to be spun by the media. And later on that day, BBC Scotland was on in our house. It wasn't me, it switched on. It was on, and it was absolutely happened. They took it and they put it in the context of, this is Scotgov trying to play catch up so that they can deal with all the people who are on the waiting lists and the people who they can't get out of hospital. And I just thought, surely to goodness, someone in the First Minister's entourage could have seen that coming and just done a little bit to try and, mitigate against it, actually, because it happens all the time. They just never get the credit for what they're doing. It's never put fully into context about what's happening in England and Wales. And, the three of us, and actually probably most of the folk watching this, know that. But there's a lot of people in Scotland don't, and it just frustrates me that Scotgov doesn't actually get better at presenting themselves. Anyway, okay, rant over for this month.
We'll look forward to next month's edition of your rant. This next clip is Patrick Harvie, and he's pretty good at sticking the knife in when he wants to, metaphorically, of course. So this is him in the budget discussions.
The Conservative dismissal of pretty much everything the government is doing was bizarre enough, but their leader's suggestion that the one thing that was wrong with Liz Truss was that she wasn't in power longer seemed even more bizarre. And the failure to recognise the UK government's track record, the impact of tax giveaways to high earners, and a brutal approach to social security, as well as the familiar ideological debate that we've had before and we'll have again on growth. The record of even just this country's economy is that there have been periods of high economic growth while whole communities have been put on the economic scrap heap. Economic growth on its own, without sustained and serious state intervention to ensure redistribution, does not create a trickle-down economy. It creates a hoover-up economy, empowering the wealthiest to further exploit the work of those on lower incomes.
That's a brilliant phrase, isn't it? It's not trickle-down, it's hoover-up.
Hoover-up, yeah.
And once they get to the top, they just hoard it. It doesn't go back into the economy. Yeah, good one, Patrick. This next one that we've got, it's a little bit longer, but there's some really, really interesting facts and figures in it about, to your point, Marlene, how well Scotgov is doing on house building and things, and also a bit of a dig at Sarwar's rhetoric, which is absolutely well made.
The Scottish Government has built 73% more affordable homes per head of population than in Wales, and 47% more affordable homes than compared to England since 2007. So that is the record of this government, and I will argue for that because the government has actually, and the facts speak for themselves, the Scottish Government, against the prevailing tide of austerity, has built more affordable houses per head of population than any other part of the United Kingdom. Now, I accept that's not enough, which is why we've just increased the budget. It's why we've put in that commitment to make sure that we can encourage and motivate more house building to address the very issues that Mr Sarwar raises with me today.
Anna Sarwar. The facts do speak for themselves. 10,000 children in Scotland are in temporary accommodation, a record high, and all the First Minister wants to do is point to other parts of the country rather than look at his own record of failure. And the truth is, this is a crisis years in the making. I would remind people, these are your constituents I'm talking about. Children in your own constituencies that are living in temporary accommodation. Always through the chair, please. The truth is, this crisis is years in the making. Miriam's heartbreaking story is just one example of thousands. On John Swinney's watch, house building down Sarwar. by 10%, the lowest number of affordable and private homes been built in more than a decade, and there are over 11,000 council houses lying empty. Every statistic, another example of a family failed and a future squandered. As Alison Watson from Shelter Scotland said, despite declaring a national housing emergency earlier this year, the Scottish Government has failed to get to grips with a deepening crisis. More than 10,000 children will wake up facing the trauma of homelessness this Christmas, the highest number on record. 10,000 children without a home to call their own on Christmas morning. So, First Minister, how many children will wake up homeless under this government next year? First Minister.
President Officer, I agree with the objectives of Mr Sarwar of ensuring that children are not living in poverty. That is absolutely at the heart of my government's programme and at the heart of everything we are trying to do. On housing, I'm afraid it's not good enough for Mr Sarwar to dismiss the points of evidence that I am making. In a climate of austerity, the Scottish Government has built more houses than per head of population, affordable houses, than in any other part of the United Kingdom. Now, that is a simple statement of evidence of the commitment we have given to housing. In the budget proposition that we've put forward, £768 million is being allocated to the budget for housing, and as part of that, resources are available to tackle the issue of voids, which has currently been tackled during this financial year, to bring more properties into use by the use of government expenditure to support that activity. In addition to all of that, the government's budget is providing a record settlement for local authorities with a £1 billion increase in local authority funding to support services which will include homelessness services. Now, this is where we get to the crunch point. Because What we'll find out in a few weeks' time is whether Mr Sarwar is interested in a solution or whether Mr Sarwar is just interested in rhetoric. Because the government's budget is going to have to be voted for in this Parliament. And the people of this country have just had an insight into Mr Sarwar's rhetoric. We've seen the rhetoric of Mr Sarwar about waspy women, where with the Labour Party, before the election, promising big, bold action on the waspy women, and what the Labour Party has delivered is absolutely nothing whatsoever.
It's good when he gets going.
It's good when he gets going, but it is just completely empty from Sarwar. And all that stuff about children at Christmas, and it is performance that he's putting on there. He's got no constructive suggestions at all as to what to do about any of this. It's just
exactly. And what he does, well, his team does, and the Conservatives do it as well, and probably Lib Dems. He knows he's got a question. He makes it it was quite a long question. That was probably his second one. That gets put out as a clip. It doesn't get put out with the First Minister's response.
Why?
It's just put out as the clip. It's just dishonest, actually. I just kind of think, well, how have we kind of come to this, really? I mean, that's probably pie in the sky, because probably it was like that before. I just didn't notice. But it just really, really aggravates me when you see that happening.
Yeah. And it's not supposed to be that kind of parliament. It's not supposed to be adversarial. I mean, the Greens are actually quite good when they've got, they can disagree, but they almost always have something they'd like. Yeah. Like the last one I saw, they wanted a cap on bus fares. Well, that's a legitimate thing to ask for.
Yeah, and they have good ideas. They have positive ideas that they put in, but all you get from Labour is stuff like that, rhetoric.
One of them, I forget which one, had the gall to ask at Holyrood why the Ferguson Marine order book was empty. So, because you've spent the last 5 years trashing their reputation at every opportunity. The same with the ferries. People don't go on holiday to Arran because they don't think there are any ferries, because that's what they hear from our representatives in Parliament. It is shocking. Now, before the Scottish Government get too comfy, here is Robin McAlpine calling them to account, and he's right on this one.
We've got electric blankets on. What that means is that we are paying once again for private energy companies to take Scotland's renewable energy and sell it back to the people of Scotland at enormous profit without the people of Scotland making anything much out of their own energy. We've been calling for years for Scotland to set up a national energy company. The Scottish Government promised to do it, and then it bottled it. Today, we are waking up to see in the newspapers that the Scottish Government's Energy Minister says it's illegal for the Scottish Government to set up a national energy company owned by the people of Scotland. It isn't. We've explained this again and again in policy reports and in many other pieces of writing. The Scottish Government can create a consortium of local authorities, all of whom can legally own as much energy generation as they like, coordinating that into a national company and using Scotland's energy resources to benefit the people of Scotland and not the shareholders of private companies. It is galling to hear again and again the Scottish Government claim it can't do this when we've explained to it over and over again that it can do this if it finds the will. And that's the reality here.
Yes, we did an episode with Craig DL from Commonweal that explained exactly that, yes, the Scottish Government can't set up an energy company, but there's loads of ways that an energy company could be set up, whether it's through councils, put together a consortium, all sorts of different options, and community ownership, all sorts of things. Yeah. Gillian Martin, I think, said was that we couldn't have a publicly owned energy company, but we can. It just can't.
Is she standing in for somebody else just now?
She's covering for Mary McAlpine.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Can I jump in with something? It's associated. It's about energy. Well, it was again. Someone in our house records Laura Kunzberg's Sunday morning program. I sometimes skim through it and have a wee look. So on Sunday, she had Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor.
It wasn't a difficult
decision.
In
the studio taking difficult decisions. Anyway, so they got on. They were talking about the Heathrow third runway, and then And Rachel Reeves said something about, well, she looked forward to Scotland leading the way, something like that, usual stuff about sustainable air travel with sustainable air fuels. Now, at that point, Laura Kuenssberg jumped in and said, well, if you're really so serious about investing in a green economy, and you've mentioned sustainable air fuels, why are you letting Grangemouth go to the wall? Because Grangemouth could be there's nowhere in the UK that's producing sustainable air fuels. That could be Grangemouth. That would take advantage. There's a lot of skilled people there before they all start and look for jobs elsewhere. That could be the start of a new purpose for Grangemouth. And why not step in? Why let them go to the wall? I mean, it's quite a strong phrase to use, isn't it? Go to the wall. So Rachel Reeves goes, oh, well, we have given money to that local authority, and we're working with the Scottish Government. And then Kuenssberg, to be, fair to her, pursued her on yes, but why not do it now to you could be creating a new industry up there, and, you've got the skills and doing it. At which point, Rachel Reeves says, but we are pursuing those kind of well-paid and skilled jobs. And yes, we are pursuing them. And that's why we're in partnership with Equinox and BP in Teesside and Merseyside for carbon
those
capture.
Well-known Scottish ports.
Those well-known Scottish, ports for carbon capture and storage energy. And we're in partnership with those companies, and we are pursuing those jobs. But I mean, she'd given up. She kind of realised she wasn't going to get it, but she just Kuenssberg finished off with, yes, that's exactly the kind of jobs that, could have worked at Grangemouth. And then carried on. So I must say, I mean, I sometimes criticise Laura Kuenssberg the way she does these interviews, but I thought that was a really good one, actually.
Mm.
Yeah, and also with the comment that they're giving money to the local authority, it's not just for Grangemouth.
No, it's right. Yeah.
It was a city development. So it's for everything in that area. There's more than Grangemouth in that area. I just seen one of the wee comments coming up talking about the deposit return scheme. So England's starting to do that.
Yes, not glass. Lorna Slater was in the National, I think it was. This is just ridiculous after everything they stymied. She said, good luck to them having the discussions with the private sector providers after what happened the last time.
Exactly. Exactly. So anyway, I snuck that one in, but where are we going next?
Right, where we're going next for something completely non-controversial.
Oh,
Trump has got elected. I feel we ought to cover it in some way. So the first clip we've got, this is...
Robert Reich. He was the Secretary of State when Kennedy was president. So he goes that far back. So he's a fairly left-wing Democrat and he has retired a long time back, but he has a really, really active blog and does a lot of writing about it. Yeah.
Well, he's done a little summary of what we can learn, or what Americans can learn from the election that got Trump elected, but also there's some parallels with us as well.
Yeah.
What is the lesson from the 2024 election? Misogyny and racism absolutely played a role. I don't believe they were the biggest factors either. Here's the real lesson. A top issue for most Americans was the economy. While the economy has improved over the last 4 years, according to standard economic measures, most Americans without college degrees, that's the majority, have not felt it. These Americans overwhelmingly voted for Trump. In fact, most Americans without college degrees have not felt much economic improvement for 4 decades, and their jobs have become less secure. Adjusted for inflation, the typical income of the bottom 90% is stuck nearly where it was in the early 1990s, even though the economy is more than twice as large. Most of the gains have gone to the top, leaving many Americans frustrated and angry. Trump gave voice to that anger. Harris did not. The real lesson of 2024 is that Democrats must not just give voice to the anger, but also explain how record inequality has corrupted our system and commit to limiting the political power of big corporations and the super rich. The middle class has shrunk. Why? While Republicans steadily cut taxes on the rich, allowing inequality to skyrocket, many Democrats abandoned the working class. Both parties let big corporations gain enough market power to keep prices and profit margins high. They let corporations bust unions and slash payrolls. They welcomed big money into their campaigns and delivered quid pro quos that rigged the market in favor of big corporations and the wealthy. Democrats must stand firm against all of this. They should demand paid family leave, Medicare for all, free public higher education, stronger unions, higher taxes on the rich, and the biggest boom in home construction since World War II. They should also demand that corporations share their profits with their workers. They should call for limits on CEO pay. Democrats need to tell Americans why their pay has been lousy for decades and their jobs less secure, and who is to blame. It's not because of immigrants, the LGBTQ community, people of color, the deep state, or any other MAGA scapegoat. It's because of the power of large corporations and the rich to rig the market and siphon off most of the economy's gains. The Democratic Party should use this inflection point to become an anti-establishment party, ready to shake up the system on behalf of the vast majority.
There's a lot in that we can see parallels with, isn't there? Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's a great deal of those things that he says, this is what the Democrats should be doing. Those are the things that Scotland has done, we've done for ourselves over the last 25 years.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of those things that he mentioned are here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I wonder if the SNP sort of cast itself in the role of shaking up the establishment, whether that might be more energizing than the current role, which seems to me to be, we are the establishment and we're going to keep it all on an even keel.
Yeah, that's it. It's that juxtaposition, isn't it? We're in power, so we've got to run the country, but we want to say, actually, we want to just shake it all up and run it completely differently. But again, that needs to be done. The only way we can actually do that is through independence, where we control everything.
And it needs it needs bravery, doesn't it? It needs a courageous government, needs a courageous bunch of people who are prepared to stick their necks out and get on with it. And I mean, the other thing that's in what he said was the whole thing. Well, in a way, I was sitting thinking, well, what he's talking about is the hoovering up economy. I mean, he was basically saying it's because of that inequality that the folk at the bottom haven't seen any increase, and of course they're angry, and you know that's exactly what we were hearing earlier, wasn't it? And from Patrick about the hoovering up one. So it's maybe not as bad quite over here as it is in the States, but on the other hand, Rachel Reeves has just decided to pull back a bit on the non-dom tax status things.
And cut the benefits of disabled people to pay for stuff.
Yes, and when she was talking to Laura Kunsberg, she said, well, I've been listening. I have been listening to what they said to me. And I thought, well, not tell you what I actually thought, but, you know, I thought, well, what about the people on personal independence payment, you know, who have some sort of disability, and you're talking about decreasing it? You haven't been listening to them.
I mean, the only good thing you can say about her is at least she's not preparing to invade Greenland, and she hasn't been sending people to Colombia and adding tariffs around everywhere, thinking that other people pay them.
A Danish MEP in the European Parliament was quite clear with his message to Mr. Trump, and the second word was off. He said, but interesting, you're just talking about everything about this hoovering up. I watched a TED talk a couple of weeks ago. I was trying to actually find it there. And it's a guy who's made millions. He's one of these very, very wealthy people. And he said, because of the way things are going, this is what I see in the future. And he says, and I see pitchforks.
Oh, good.
That's what, you know, he's saying, because they're slowly but surely making more and more people poorer and poorer, and eventually, but you know, it's like, you know, they drain the swamp. Well, the people in the swamp are actually going to realize there's more of us than there is of you, and there's only so much you can do about it.
Their wealth as well. There was an article about Musk, and although he is the richest man in the world, that's not necessarily money that he has in his account. That's a sort of paper value of shares and a huge amount of loans that are now being called in that he used to buy Twitter. So, you know, it's power as much as wealth.
Anyway.
Okay, so but you said something a minute ago, Marlene, which was absolutely right. You said it takes courage to stand up to people like Trump. And there was a fabulous display of courage that came from his inauguration. And this is Bishop Marianne Edgar Budd. And just imagine with the world's cameras on you and Trump sitting right in front of you, how much courage does it take to say what she said?
Final plea, Mr. President. Millions have put their trust in you. And as you told the nation yesterday, you have felt the providential hand of a loving God. In the name of our God, I ask you to have mercy upon the people in our country who are scared now. There are gay, lesbian, and transgender children in Democratic, Republican, and independent families. Some who fear for their lives.
I was just going to say, look at their faces. Not one of that, not an empathetic look in their face, just...
Yeah. And he came out of there and demanded that she be deported, you know, to where? She's clearly an American citizen.
And I mean, and she went on after that to say, and, you know, the vast majority of the other people who are scared are people who are here without documentation. And, you know, the vast majority of those people are not criminals. They do not break the law. They pay their taxes. They contribute to our society. And you could see he was just, and yeah.
There was a great thing on Blue Sky that I saw. It was a picture of a bakery in America. And there's no workers in it. There's no deliveries being made. There's nobody doing any cleaning. Because the employees have all been either rounded up or gone into hiding, you know, because that is what keeps the economy going. And who cleans the pools, who washes the cars, who looks after you. There's a great business opportunity for selling pitchforks. Let's all get shares in pitchforks. We'll be rich. And then just to finish off the Trumpiness, we've got Mary Trump, who's his niece, who we featured, I think, the last live stream. And this is her reporting on his visit to Notre Dame. It's quite funny.
Donald visits Notre Dame. On his first international trip since the election, Donald traveled to Paris to join world leaders and dignitaries to celebrate the renovation and reopening of Notre Dame Cathedral 5 years after much of it was destroyed in a devastating fire. For some reason, Donald thought that this was a brilliant occasion to launch yet another grift, just in time for Christmas. He's selling a new fragrance for $199 a bottle. This weekend, he used a photo of Jill Biden in his perfume pitch on True Social. In the post, he said, "I call them fight, fight, fight because they represent us winning." Because that's what perfumes are supposed to represent, I guess. Fragrances are available in both men's and women's. I'm guessing they probably smell something like some combination of pheromones, desperation, and treason. A perfect gift for the woman in your life.
Basically, comparing him to a snake oil salesman.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
$199 a bottle.
Exactly. Good.
The last one is back to Holyrood, but we've just had Burns Night. We've just had a celebration of Scots language all around us, and I don't know how many people noticed this little bit at Holyrood.
Loons, quines, bairns and wains, muckledrich, druchet, fusti, clarty. These are unique Scots words, Presiding Officer. Scots is one of the 3 Indigenous languages of Scotland, and I wanted to speak today to again highlight my mother tongue. Presiding Officer Dr Sylvia Wernicke is the Senior Lecturer in Languages at the OU and leads the Scots Teacher Professional Learning Programme, created in conjunction with Education Scotland. Dr Wernicke has undertaken extensive research and teaching in supporting minority and marginalised groups with their linguistic needs, including Scots and deaf communities. She does pioneering work using languages, including Scots, to support the well-being of people in care homes, and she upskills overseas social care staff in intercultural literacies and Scotland's Indigenous languages. To date, the Scots Teacher Professional Learning Programme has 152 fully funded places, funded by the Scottish Government, with a further 66 places for 2024-2025. There are schools in Dumfries and Galloway participating, Castle Douglas and Kirkcudbright Primary Schools, St Joseph's College and the High School in Dumfries, and Douglas Ewart High School in Newton Stewart. This course supports how to include and embed Scots language and culture in their classrooms. It creates a Scotland-wide community of practice where teachers realise the transformative role of embedding Scots language and culture in the classroom. I would ask that the Government continue to place a high importance on continuing to fund the course to ensure continued success.
So how does that sound to you, Lynn, as a teacher? Is that something you would be interested in doing?
Yeah, because I think, I've taught in a variety of schools, and the kids they talk like that. I talk like that. And sometimes it was always, there's that little conflicted bit in me. It was like, because I was told it, speak properly. Now, I lived in Kenya when I was young, so I was at an international school just for a few years because I came back when I was 8, and people from all over the world. So we did kind of have this homogenized accent, but my mum always said I was good at acquiescing. When we came over here and moved to Falkirk, she said I could have 3 different accents in the same day depending on who I was talking to. And I always remember coming back from my first sort of term at uni in Edinburgh, meeting up with a friend from school and saying to her, remember to bring your holiday photographs. And she went, what happened to mind the 40s? And I was like, yeah, sorry, I'm back in Falkirk. Mind your 40s. It's so rich, and I think if people pay attention and listen to it, you can hear it, you can understand it.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks to everybody for joining in the comments. As ever, we've featured quite a few of yours on the screen, so thank you for that.
That's us for this month. Yep.
Thank you very much.
Yep. Thanks for coming, everyone.